All right, 112, folks. I'm talking about Unit 2. I'm talking, in this case, about Chapter 19. We've been talking about the New World. We've been talking about the changes. We've been talking about the fact that there is an increase in the slave trade. And the increase in the slave trade, believe it or not, has a lot to do with two things. It's going to be mercantilism. And I've already talked about mercantilism and the idea being that we're going to expand the imperial footprint as a mother or father nation, whichever way you want to swing with that. And the idea being is you want to expand the reach of your footprint by creating colonies, and the colonies are placed out there to supply you with raw materials so that you can ship them finished goods and that they can protect your frontier. They can create an expansion, they create a footprint, and there is a way to exit the people, to put it nicely. Because sometimes we want them to exit and to be out there in the world, and I'll talk more about that as we go. But the idea of mercantilism is significant. If I am Britain, then I'm going to establish British colonies that I want to trade with me so I can further my market. If I'm France, I want to create French colonies that will trade with me so I can go ahead and expand my market. Of course, that's going to put France and Britain right against each other. The Dutch are going to be in there, but they're not an army. The Spanish are going to be there, but the Spanish are going to be a different area of the world. They're going to be more about the New World, the Southwest, and uh, South America. We know Portugal is going to be down in Africa and out around the sides, and eventually they will be over in the Far East, in the Indian Ocean out there. Britain will eventually start to expand. France will eventually start to expand. With that comes the expansion of colonization. It comes the expansion of the plantation system. And the plantation system is significant because it's going to be the plantation system that requires, the increase in slavery to support that system. There's going to be certain elements of production when it comes to cotton, when it comes to tobacco, when it comes to rice, when it comes to, in the very beginning, it's not coffee or any of those, but it's sugar. And the sugar cane fields are going to need some workers. Well, it turns out that the Native Americans in the area can't stand up to the demands. They can't stand up to the work. They can't stand up to what the factory plantations want to put them through. And so we're going to see an importation of Africans. Well, that African slave trade is part of the triangular trade route. The idea that whether it is first Portugal and then the Dutch and eventually the British, when they take over the trade, are going to leave Europe with goods, ship the goods down to Africa at the Bight of Biafra, that cusp that is out of the side of Africa on the west coast, and the upper version of it there is what we call the slave coast. You have to realize that when the Portuguese get there and they start trading, they're bringing some new things, but it's not Columbus in the New World by any standards. You have to realize that there are several existing empires, there's several different kingdoms in Africa that have been for years trading with Europe. They've been trading with Asia. If you go down to the Asante, right? If you go down to Mali, if you go down to Ghana, and all those are really popping up, and for the most part, up here in the hub of Northwest Africa, which is where we're landing at this particular point in that upper Bight of Biafra. Those are mineral rich, resource rich areas. And so what we look at is several empires, blossoming and falling, blossoming and falling, blossoming and falling, in roughly the same footprint area as it extends out. And so there is war. Okay, there is war, there is unrest competing over the resources. With war in Africa also comes slavery, because you capture the opponents and bring them back to work for you. So slavery exists. When the Portuguese come in, they're going to tap into the slave trade. What you have to remember is, since these people have been trading, I mean, there have been empires in Africa for several hundred years. You have empires that are trading iron with Rome. Okay, you have the Benins that are doing the Benin bronzes, the bronze casting of fantastic sculptures. Google Benin bronzes and you'll find out what I'm talking about. You're finding the Igbo people. You're finding the Asante, the Asante who have their own mounted knights. Just like the Crusader knights along the way, and so they're in some cases equivalent to what the Europeans are bringing. And that's where the mistake is at. People think about going to Africa, they think about Columbus, and they think this look, this is actually a Cherokee War Club that was made for me by a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And what's significant about this is that it's made out of natural materials in the area. It is made out of rubber cane. It is made out of the natural stone. It's made out of leather from animal skins. This is the height of technology for Native Americans in North America. Okay, it's not so with what's happening in Africa, and so we're looking at certain elements that they have. They're going to have iron. They're going to have some certain things, but they're not going to have others. When they begin to trade, we're going to see an introduction of new elements into society. What starts as a willing trade in excess humans is going to become a less willing trade, because we're going to find out that the Europeans will have some dominant technology. When you start talking about gunpowder, when you start talking about guns, when you start talking about more refined, iron on the edges of steel, the African nations don't have that. What they're going to get caught up in is they're going to get caught up in the slave trade. What happens is this becomes the African hub for what will be the transatlantic journey that we know is the Middle Passage, where we're going to have groups of African emissaries that are going to go out and gather up hostages. They're going to go ahead and take hostages from other groups. They're going to bring them back to slave fortresses to put them into barracoons, which are the slave corrals, until they have a shipload, S-H-I-P, not S-H-I-T, shipload of people to go ahead and ship. And then we know that they're going to ship them on the Middle Passage. We know that they're expecting 20% of the of the cargo to pass away, because they're shipping them in subhuman conditions. That this Middle Passage becomes actually a unifying principle for newly enslaved people. The slaves that end up in the Americas all have this common ancestry, this all common ideal that, hey, listen, we all survived this, and we can certainly survive whatever we're dealing here. When they end up in the New World and they go through the seasoning process, the introduction to the slave system, the introduction, to where they're at, that's part of the breaking in process. They will trade the slaves in the New World. They will trade them in the Caribbean for the sugar, and they will take that sugar to the northeast of North America and trade it for wood and other supplies, and the sugar is converted into rum, which ends up going back to Europe. It's not really a triangle, although they call it triangular trade, but the idea is once the British take over, they will ship 10 times the amount of slaves that anybody else did. But it's also going to be the British that are going to be responsible for abolishing the African slave trade, thanks to William Wilberforce, who is going to eventually get the laws passed through Parliament that eliminate the new African slave trade. It's going to be the British patrolling the coast of Africa to eliminate the slave trade, until eventually they're going to abolish slavery in Britain and the British colonies. So, although they do some awful things, this mercantilism, this slave trade, is also going to, be the end of what happens here. So I will pick it up because we have to talk about competition between Britain and France.